My name is Martin Shields. I'm living here in 3 Broughton Street, Dundalk, since 22nd of the 7th, 1967.
My name is Eileen McCann. I was born in the parish of Faughart, outside Dundalk, but for the last 25 years I've lived here in Broughton Street.
My name is Ian Bridges. I'm Scottish, and my mother's Scottish. I was born in Suffolk, in England. I took a long, hard look at the United Kingdom, and I decided I didn't want my children growing up through their formative years in the United Kingdom for a variety of reasons. We rented in Spain, so the family went to school in Spain, learned Spanish. And then my wife, after 2 years, decided that she wanted to go back to work. Unbeknown to me, someone had sent an inquiry about her CV, which she'd left her CV with a company online. She hadn't told me, but obviously once she was invited over, she had to tell me. In one breakfast, she said, what would you think if I said we're moving to Dundalk in Ireland?
I found one of the maps here. I took them out to let you see them, and Broughton Street is in it. There's Broughton Street there now.
My father was born here in this house, as like myself, and he passed away in 2016. My father came from a family, the Shields family. Originally they would have come from Browns Row on the quay, that doesn't exist anymore. They would have moved here in around the 1900s.
It was a perfect piece of Victorian town planning. There was a series of cholera outbreaks because the centre of the town was very congested, and it was so congested that the toilets, outside toilets, and the bins were all in enclosed courtyards, and once a year they had to dry lavies, we call them. They had to dig them out, and they were taking that out through the houses. So it was insanitary. It's perfect for cholera. And the town, and I don't know which, if it was a branch of the town, because the development in Britain was different. In London, there was a thing called the Peabody Trust, and they were the first people who intervened and built housing for poor people. First social housing, as we call it now. But the first row they built was that row of cottages in St Mary Street, and single-storey cottages with a back garden and a laneway with the toilets outside. But this is a traditional English form. All these houses, there's a row of houses, and then the kitchen is built out because the kitchen smells, so you build, and it catches fire occasionally, so you don't build it within the house. In those days, and the toilet, obviously, it smells even further, so you build it further out. So all the houses have the double, it's a row, and you get in each the sawtooth of the toilet and the kitchen. But most have been. So that started it, and then this would belong to, I can't remember, it was an English estate.
These houses were all owned as part of an estate owned by the Earl of Roden.
And they made it into plots. And that was in the 1895, 1896. And then this plot was sold in the middle of 1896 and they started building.
Built in stages, so the houses here from 1 to 4 Broughton Street is one block. It's a block of 4 houses. Would have been built by a builder called Mackin, and there roughly 20 feet at the front by 100 feet depth right to the back of the house, each in equal size.
The house I'm in is part of a row of 4. Mine, next door, and the next 2. And in between the 4 is a laneway, a back entrance. And all our water is connected, all our sewage is connected, just these 4 houses. And then there was a break, and then there was another group of houses. That's how it was built originally.
It's the same system, I think, as Britain, as Scotland, that a developer would buy a strip. That's why you get similar, then there's a slightly different style. You'd buy a strip, but what they used to do in Glasgow, they'd buy a strip, sometimes a full, block frontage, and then they would sell half of it to fund the development, and then they would build the development and then sell the second half, but they would only build half of it, and then they got the money in, and they would use that money to capitalise the second half. Then halfway through they'd have to go back to the financiers, finish it, and then sell it, and they'd have their, so their profit ran through to give them liquid capital. So that's a kind of British commercial development, residential development plan, and it would be the same here, because looking at the way this was set out and the way it was built, it's too similar.
These houses were built in around the 1889 mark. Initially this was called New Street, and sometime afterwards, when they had the street nearly completed, they changed the name from New Street to Broughton Street, and then the other houses on top became New Street, and it has stayed the same way.
Well, from what I've gathered from speaking with other people, that this was done purposely, because what they wanted to do is, there was, obviously with Clanbrassil, if you look at all the names, this was all English owned. It's English brick, which they brought the brick. The flat bottom boats had to have ballast going that way, coming this way they had to have ballast, because they didn't leave here empty. They left here full of corn.
I take it that Broughton came from the northeast of England somewhere, due to the fact that my little bit of research would have been, there was a Lord Broughton, there was Broughton Hall, so I take it there would have been some connection between Broughton and the Earl of Roden at the time. Subsequently, I think that's why they named a lot of the places around.
They went, coming back, they couldn't cross the channel empty, so they filled them with brick. So Dublin, Drogheda and Dundalk were all built with the brick that was from the flat bottom boats, which gives you an idea of the amount of corn that was exported by the English from here, right through the critical periods of the famine. So, but they only use the brick for the front. There are Northern Ireland, there were brick kilns in Ireland, but the brick was inferior to the Bristol. It's called a London brick, but it actually is from Bristol, because Bristol were the first people to, I can't remember the guy's name. The Germans invented it's called a rotating kiln. It doesn't rotate, but you've got stuff at every stage throughout the kiln, so you're firing here, you're firing there, you're firing there, you're cooling there, coming out, you're loading here. And they had them, and they installed the German idea when it was fairly new in Germany. They installed it in Bristol because the clay there is better. So what we call a London brick in Britain is actually a Bristol brick, and it was the Bristol brick that was brought over here, and it's used for the front. The backs and the outhouses because if you look at the backs, you'll see the brick spalls. It's too It's not killed. It's not fired at high enough temperature. So or the clay is inferior. So it's got a much higher porosity than the Bristol clay, and it absorbs water. So if there's any frost damage, it breaks down the cellular structure, and then the face starts to spall off. It had the grid, it had the cul-de-sacs within the grid, it had the hierarchy of the main streets, it had the secondary streets which ran through, it had the tertiary streets. It was a perfect piece of Victorian town planning. And it had all the laneways, which I subsequently found out because it was a post-cholera planned after the third outbreak of cholera in the centre of the town. They had all the laneways, so that you don't call them biddens. The dustbins and the toilets could be cleaned out without going through the houses.
Take us to the front door. You're in a narrow hallway. The door to the right brought us into what was a small sitting room area. It was always known as the parlour. In those days, it was always kept as a good room. That was for a particular visitor who may come to the house. They'd be taken in there, you know. It was sort of kept as a good room. Then the door facing you, you walked in and you had a stairway. You could see the stairs tapering down. But that was the main area. That was the original kitchen of the house. And there would have been a big open range in there. Everybody got rid of them then and put in fireplaces and put in their back boilers and all that type of thing. But I remember it being done. I remember the old range there with the crooks and the whole lot on it, you know, and the big brass rail for hanging the washing was dried there, you know. So it would have been the agate, the old cream coloured agate. It was the original one. And then when you walked straight out, you walked into a small scullery, as we used to call them. It was just a small back kitchen where everything was cooked. You could eat there. And then you had a small yard outside where you had a small shed, which was normally for storing bicycles, a little coal shed. And then you had the outside toilet. There was no inside toilet. There was no heating in these houses either. It was all done purely by fires. Every room in the house, apart from the attic space, had a fireplace. When you turned in the small scullery and you go up the stairs, you have a front bedroom, which if you're standing at the front of the house, you see the two upstairs windows. That was the main bedroom of the house. That was normally the parents' bedroom. To the left, you had a back bedroom, and off it were other stairs that went up into an attic space, and that was my bedroom. Spacious, they were quite spacious, you know. The only thing was, furniture was never made to suit a tent-shaped type room, you know what I mean? And we have skylights. There was always a skylight there, you know. When I was in my teens and late teens, and when you started to smoke, that's where you went to get the old fag into you and blow the smoke out the window. Of course, it went back down into the house, like, you know. But that was all part and parcel of it. But yeah, it was. They were a small, compact house, but they were. They met the needs up until, we'll say, the late 70s. Then people realised then that they needed to make the houses better, you know, because you had bigger families coming in. And now, it was just myself and my sister here. So what we decided to do was knocked the old place out the back, the yard, cleared it all away and built a new kitchen, a back kitchen, a flat roof, felt type back kitchen. And that would incorporate a more modern kitchen with a bathroom. We never had a bathroom here up until we built that, and that was way back in the late 70s. And I remember it as a child. Every Saturday evening, 4 o'clock, the big tub would come in front of the fire, which would have been here, which would have been right here. This was the room, and myself and my sister got bathed there in front of the fire. That was at 4 o'clock every Saturday. These houses were all owned as part of an estate owned by the Earl of Roden, which was then subsequently passed on to a man called John Taff from Castletown. Rent or lease was paid here up until the 1970s. I actually remember my mother, John Taff, calling to the house to collect the rates, as they used to say. And she used to pay him the few shillings or whatever it was. It was very cheap. And then at that stage then, he decided the laws were changing, and he decided to get rid of a lot of the properties that they would have had under that old lease system. And they offered the houses up for sale. And they offered them quite cheaply. And most people who were here long term took up on the offer and bought. And I think way back in the 70s, these houses were bought for around between £2,000 and £3,000 at the time, which was probably a lot of money then, but you know, they were still quite cheap, you know.
I found one of the maps here. I took them out to let you see them, but in older ones, if you look here now, this one is in it. There's no Broughton Street. There's Chapel Lane, which is Chapel Street, and all that. But this is all. There's nothing. That's where Broughton Street came along. But in this one, is it this one? We have a Broughton Street. I think it's that. We have a Broughton Street. You know, so as I said, it was built in 1854.